we've really only focused on the evening. And the bad part about that is
Less
there's this whole
there.
terminology that I started focusing on really heavily throughout the season, and it's not new, but it's net displacement. And I started measuring when deer would stand out of their bed. So in the morning, when deer would stand out of their bed, and then when they would bed back down in the middle of the day. And I would draw a straight line between those two. That's net displacement. And then vice versa for the evening, when they would stand out of their bed and then all the way until last light. So they didn't have to be bedded back down. And in most cases, they weren't. They were still standing on their feet. But at the moment that legal shooting light ended, that's where I would drop that last pin. And then I would draw a straight line between the two. Morning net displacement was 4 times greater across the board on average than evening displacement.
So you're going to capitalize on increased
morning
movement.
mature buck movement.
And there's a fine distinction to make here. There's a fine distinction to make here as well, because in total yards traveled, the difference isn't really that great. And in the evening, they're still walking around a lot. They're just staying in that kind of what we talked about. They're staying in that general core location. Whereas in the morning, they're walking a very missional, long, semi-straight, terrain-driven, in my case, travel route. And what it's going to do for you, if you're hunting in the morning versus the evening, is it's going to allow not only that mature buck to be alone more often, because he's on a mission, he's doing something on his own, but he's going to slip up a lot more often. He's going to position himself, especially if you have terrain features, he's going to position himself in locations where you're at the advantage in those areas, and he's not particularly. And there's no other noses, there's no other sets of eyes around to watch you or sniff you, and that's going to put him at a major disadvantage in that setting.
All right, I have a question for you, and I know you're probably getting close to bringing her down for a landing.
Mainly because my battery's down. I forgot my charger.
I'm sorry,
right.
But I have to ask him, because this is a conversation I had with Tony Van Asten, very good hunter from Wisconsin, and he brought this up to me, and it's every time I think about it, it makes more and more sense. But Derrick, how many times? I don't know when exactly I'm assuming around daylight or around sunrise that you got your drone up into the air, but I'm just curious. Did you notice maybe that morning displacement, that number was 4 times larger? Did you notice that mature deer were sometimes bedded in the morning before daylight? Kind of like, so the theory that Tony had was a lot of times these mature deer are bedding down in those thermal hubs where they're getting all that thermal dump in the morning before even daylight or around daylight. They lay there for a little while, and then once the day winds kick in, they make a big move to go to a potential bedding area that's going to offer them the best advantage for that day wind, which means they're moving more in the morning daylight hours because they're seeking security before light in these thermal dumps where like everything's kind of coming down. He sees them bedding very low, and then they make a move during daylight to go to whatever bedding area is going to offer them the best for that day wind. Did you notice anything like that, or is that just something that you're hearing going, yeah, it's a cool idea, but no?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say for sure that I've seen something exactly like that multiple times to where I can just document it, but I feel like I have, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I've definitely seen mature bucks bedding in thermal hubs, like for reference in the morning, and then sometimes staying in those thermal hubs for a little bit longer past daylight, when thermals are still kind of falling down and draining towards the bottom, and then getting up a little bit later. But I've also seen where one thing I don't think a lot of people realize is how far into the morning a mature buck will move. Oftentimes I'm not seeing them make their midday bed until 9 to 10:30 a.m. And for me, like as traditionally as a hunter, kind of how I was taught, once it hits like 8:15 to 8:45, it's like we're wrapping this crap up and I'm heading home type thing. Or we're gonna go take a nap or eat something, whatever. But like you're done in the morning. But from what I'm seeing, I'm seeing them still, and oftentimes, in that later period, they're in a pretty good location, but still then they're still on their feet throughout that time frame. And I think that some guys that end up killing midday moving deer, where they're killing one on like 10:30 or 10:45, and maybe they're kind of near a community scrape or something in that situation, I think they're picking them up on the tail end of that morning travel route. Not so often making a midday shift in some of those situations. That's not 100%, but I think that that's happening more often than not.